Hi, my name is Selena Lee, and I will be going over the SolarWinds supply chain attack. So starting off, what exactly is a supply chain attack? It's a type of attack in which adversaries can modify the product provided by a third-party associate in various ways to compromise targets. In the case of SolarWinds, the malware inserted was corrupted during production and then was deployed as part of a routine update from SolarWinds' own servers to its customers. When you patch or update your system, this is when you introduce the malware. And through targeting these third-party software providers and compromising its code, it enables the attackers to potentially gain access to all the agencies and companies that rely on and implicitly trust the software. And so a bit about SolarWinds. SolarWinds is an American software company that develops software management tools for businesses to help manage their network systems and IT infrastructure. And it is an on-premise product requiring local resources to install and manage. So going into background, starting with the point of discovery, on December 8th, 2020, one of the biggest names in the cybersecurity industry, FireEye, revealed that hackers had infiltrated their systems. However, that discovery was really just the tip of the iceberg, as FireEye was one of the many victims attackers gained access to via a Trojanized malicious update in the Orion network management system, with the Orion platform acting as the main attack vector behind Sunburst. And the attack was a supply chain attack that replaced the update to their SolarWinds Orion product with a version that contained malicious payload, inserting a backdoor into the product. And with this attack, it's believed that the attacker's motivation was in the realm of espionage as opposed to ransomware or pure destruction. And the attack is linked to APT29, also known as Cozy Bear, and they're a Russian-linked cyber espionage group. So why should you care? The SolarWinds attack is important to study as one of the most sophisticated and protracted intrusion attacks with a minimal footprint. And software supply chain attacks are one of the hardest threats to prevent, as they leverage the trust relationship between vendors and customers. Supply chain attacks are increasingly popular as they affect tertiary victims at scale. And in the future, smaller scale attacks could and most likely will use similar tools or tactics. So it's important to be able to identify and combat them. SolarWinds is also used worldwide, potentially having impacted over 18,000 companies. And in order to help mitigate future attacks, it's important for the defenders to share and communicate known information to increase overall resilience. The SolarWinds Orion network management system is an incredibly popular asset monitoring tool. And just in order to give you context about how popular the tool is, notable customers include the US government, as well as over 90% of Fortune 500 companies, including Microsoft, Cisco, and Intel, all of which were affected during the SolarWinds attack. And pretty much all the big names you can think of, they were using SolarWinds. And companies like Orion are prime targets for attackers, as they are able to communicate with all devices and make changes on behalf of its configuration, with most having privileges that allow for read or write access. So how did this happen? As you can see from this timeline provided by Microsoft, September 2019 is when access begins. Attackers have initial access, however, they strategically lay dormant, injecting test code and trialing, which goes unnoticed. And in this time, they set up their C2 servers. They wait until February 20th to deploy an update that includes malicious code opening a backdoor, codenamed Sunburst, to the networks it's installed in. All updates from February 20th to June 2020 had this backdoor. However, attackers then removed it in the next update, which further enabled them to evade detection. This initial compromise permitted data exfiltration and lateral movement through SolarWinds customer environment via their Orion monitoring tool. It's reported that attackers successfully accessed a build server through logging into Microsoft 365 with a compromised password. The adversary compromised the update service and was able to add the malicious payload to the package via a DLL file. And DLL just stands for Dynamic Link Libraries, and it just contains a binary file of classes and functions and methods that they're not directly executed, but an application will load them when required. Specifically, the DLL method was named Orion Improvement Business Layer, and this was strategically named to keep stealth. The update utilized a valid digital certificate, so there were no red flags when the update was pushed. So appearing benign, the code posed a serious threat to the companies that utilize the Orion service. The malware, called a backdoor, composed of about 4,000 lines of code that allowed adversaries to operate unfettered in compromised networks. Microsoft's analysis noted that the class's backdoor capability is comprised of 13 subclasses and 16 methods, as well as using an obfuscation to further hide malicious code. The hack is extremely sophisticated, as I mentioned previously, with the initialized method performing several checks before running in the victim's environment, such as being aware of its current environment, checking for popular security diagnostic programs, as well as verifying domain name and IP address. The attack is programmed to sit dormant for 2 weeks, so even if the update is installed in a quarantined environment, it would take 2 weeks before any suspicions would arise. And the backdoor receives instruction from the attacker via command and control server, or C2, communicating HTTP requests using a pseudo-random URI to invoke commands passing payload within the HTTP body in JSON format. And access to malware granted attackers full remote access, as they could come into customer networks, steal files, and install additional malicious software, and even conduct reconnaissance to gain information about the environments. SolarWinds was heavily criticized for its lack of cybersecurity leadership, and following the attack leak, CEO Kevin Thompson was replaced on December 9th by Sudhakar Ramakrishna, the former chief executive of PulseSecure. SolarWinds as a corporation, them itself weren't exactly the target of the attack and mainly acted as the method for the attack. And with that in mind, the threat actors had the opportunity to collect sensitive data from government agencies and large companies that were customers of SolarWinds. The threat actors that conducted Sunburst didn't just use one piece of malware to achieve their objectives. They developed multiple types of malware for the SolarWinds attacks, so it's not limited to Sunburst. And with that in mind, the full scope of this attack is still unknown and most likely will take several years to see the full scope of its impact. This attack could potentially affect the security of our entire tech ecosystem. Many organizations are still investigating whether they were directly or indirectly affected by SolarWinds. And as seen with the SolarWinds attack, it's important to recognize that suppliers are vulnerable and do get hacked. Customers may not be proactively notified of vulnerabilities, so it's important for companies to do their due diligence in terms of suppliers to protect from both immediate risk and liability. Sunburst highlights the need for revision of security prevention policies to be considered during the vendor selection process, as well as during the application of principle of least privilege and zero trust, where nothing should be automatically trusted inside or outside the company's perimeters, and also limiting supplier access through whittling down the amount of information they have access to. And another key takeaway is to consider ways to improve resilience by focusing on limiting attack surfaces available to the opposition and hidden targets. At the end of the day, cyber attacks are inevitable. However, it's important to optimize the infrastructure to make it more difficult to target. as well as have thorough detection and mitigation strategies. And here are my citations. And so questions. First, I'd like to pose, can you trust third-party vendors and to what extent? And another question is, goes off the fact that FireEye got involved at a relatively early stage and was a key factor in fueling research and analysis of this event. Why was the attack only found by FireEye, and why other organizations didn't attack the attack, namely the US government?